with us. But it looks like there's some obstruction because of the type of mask you are using. So if you could, if not, then we need more volume of your voice, because I myself was struggling to capture what you were saying.
What?
Yes, you can go on. You are finished.
Yeah, could you
I'm told that there will be an attempt to increase the volume of the mic for you.
Very good.
Yes, Minister, you may go on now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, I had long COVID complications, and by the grace of God, we are doing very well now. So with your kind permission, I would like to maintain the face mask and ensure that my voice carries. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, so the ministry, as midwife, as we call ourselves, will always be in readiness to work with any parliamentary committee. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 expenditures have been broadly provided for in pages 274, 3 and 274 in the 2021 budget statement and economic policy, and also page 335 of the 2022 budget. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the granular issues at the various ministries, departments and agencies, the arms of government including Parliament as well as constitutional bodies and also the state enterprises. I'm afraid that the committees would do a great job. The ministry does not follow these bodies on the various parts of expenditure apart from the report they submit to the ministry. Notwithstanding this, and to set minds at ease, I'm here for the avoidance of doubt to respond to the allocations made to the various bodies and institutions. Mr. Speaker, on 11th March 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. This moment has marked a defining moment in world history, and its impact still reverberates globally. Mr. Speaker, here in Ghana, we recorded our first 2 cases on 12 March 2020. His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo immediately put together a task force which spearheaded the development of a bold, comprehensive, and decisive strategy to ensure that we are not overwhelmed by the pandemic. In line with this strategy, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy of Ghana was assessed and measures designed to address its immediate impact. However, the impact of the pandemic was even more severe than anticipated, both globally and domestically. It has upended and exposed the weaknesses in critical structures and systems in education, health, economic life, and communities. The pandemic triggered a sharp and heavy disruption in global supply chains as lockdowns and restrictions led to reductions in demand and production levels. Mr. Speaker, this has required us to undertake major fiscal measures beyond what we programmed prior to the pandemic to finance the additional expenditure such as support to households, engagement of additional health personnel, deployment of security personnel at our borders to enforce the COVID-19 protocols, as well as the procurement of personal protective equipment. Government has had to adopt major fiscal measures to accommodate the increased expenditures and the shortfalls in revenue. Though our response was bold, decisive, and compassionate, it has also been costly. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that on 30th March 2020, I made a statement to Parliament on the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy of Ghana, following which the implementation of the Coronavirus Alleviation Program commenced. Furthermore, during the presentation of the 2020 mid-year fiscal policy, I indicated that the supplementary request included a program funding of $19.3 billion from various funding sources to support the budget both directly and indirectly. On the expenditure side, an amount of $11.16 billion was programmed for COVID-19 related expenses, detailed attached as Appendix 1. The difference of $8.14 billion was programmed to provide for shortfalls in revenue. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the budget programmed the total amount of $4.6 billion for COVID-19 related expenses, detailed attached as Appendix 2. It is worth noting that the Ministry of Finance mobilized the needed financial resources while the various COVID-19 interventions and related expenses were implemented by the relevant sector ministries and agencies. Mr. Speaker, to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on businesses and households, ensure that economic activities recover and minimize job losses, government mobilized $18.19 billion out of the program $19.3 billion in 2020 from various funding sources as shown in Table 1 to support the budget. GOG contingency fund of $1.2 billion, World Bank group funds of $1.3 billion, IMF $1 billion program, AFDB $405 million, EU $504 million, BOG bonds $10 billion, summing up to $19.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, government program funding of $1,203,715,085 CDs to finance the Coronavirus Alleviation Program. This program focused on achieving 5 key objectives: limit and stop the importation of the virus, contain its spread, provide adequate care for the sick, limit the impact of the virus on social and economic life, and inspire the expansion of our domestic capability and deepen our self-reliance. The Ministry of Health also led the preparation and implementation of the Emergency Preparedness and Response Plan, which was financed with funds from the World Bank. An amount of $230 million was secured from various facilities under the World Bank to support the implementation of COVID-19 Emergency Preparedness and Response Plan. The funding facilities included the Fast Track COVID-19 Facility, $35 million. This financing is Ghana's share of the World Bank's $4 billion Fast Track COVID-19 Facility that was announced in March 2020 to enable countries to deal with the pandemic. GAID SEC $65 million. This amount was drawn from the existing World Bank-funded Greater Accra Resilient and Integrated Development Project by activating the contingency response component of the project. An additional financing of $130 million in November 2020 to strengthen and scale up the gains of the EPRP. Mr. Speaker, an additional financing of $200 million was also secured in 2021, largely for the acquisition and deployment of COVID-19 vaccines to support other sources of financing of the vaccination program under this plan. The plan sought to achieve the following: strengthen coordination of the overall preparedness activities. Strengthen capacity of regions, priority health facilities and points of entry to prevent, rapidly detect, investigate, and control any COVID-19 outbreak in Ghana. Strengthen national capacity for laboratory surveillance and diagnostics. Build capacity for early diagnosis, case management, contact tracing and infection prevention and control. Ensure minimum health logistics are in place in prioritized regions, health facilities and points of entry for preparedness and laboratory capacity sustained for timely and quality testing of COVID-19 samples. And increase public awareness on COVID-19 risk mitigation and response measures. Budget support. Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the above sources of funds, other funds were sourced to support the budget. These include the $1 billion from the International Monetary Fund, 10 billion Ghana cedis from the Bank of Ghana, $69.3 million from the Africa Development Bank, and $99.7 million from the European Union. By the grace of the Almighty God, through our well-designed plans and the internal and external funds we mobilize, government provided support to the frontline health workers, protected livelihoods and job losses, demonstrated care to the vulnerable in society, and supported small businesses. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted that the status of utilization of the funds to finance the COVID-19 measures excludes funds of the National COVID-19 Trust Fund and the Ghana Private Sector COVID-19 Fund. Mr. Speaker, for the year 2020 and 2021, the program expenditure amounted to $15.763 million for the COVID-19 related expenditure, out of which the actual utilization was $12.036 million. In 2020, a total amount of $11.162 million, this includes a cap, was programmed for COVID-19 related expenditure. Out of this amount, a total of $8.12 billion was utilized. The amount was utilized to provide support to households, supply equipment, and provide relief to health workers, health infrastructure, security operations, evacuations, quarantine and coordination, economic relief, stabilization and revitalization, and COVID-19 complementary releases. Mr. Speaker, a total amount of $4.6 billion was programmed in the 2021 budget for COVID-19 related expenses. At the end of 2021, total utilization was $3.9 billion, representing 85% utilization. Expenditure on COVID-19 falls within the following broad categories: supports to household, health responses, health infrastructure, security operations, economic relief, COVID-19 vaccines, other COVID-related expenditure, all summing up to the $12.03 billion. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I wish to dispel the notion that there have been inconsistencies in government data on COVID-19. His Excellency the President intimated during the State of the Nation address on 30th March 2022 that we had mobilized about $17.7 billion since 2020 to fight the pandemic. We subsequently reconciled the data, and I can report that as of end May 2022, we've mobilized $18.19 billion to mitigate the effect of the pandemic. Again, when His Excellency the Vice President indicated on 7th April 2022 at the National TESCON Conference that government has spent $8.1 billion on COVID-19, it was within the context of expenditures for 2020, as I've already indicated. Right Honorable Speaker, permit me to use this occasion to highlight the financial management and accountability framework for receipt and use of public funds, especially as relates to COVID-19. All public expenditures are incurred from funds approved by the Honorable House. These expenditures may be drawn from the Consolidated Fund, Contingency Fund, or other statutory funds earmarked for specific purposes. At the onset of COVID-19, the Ministry of Finance applied for and obtained approval of Parliament to lower the cap on the Stabilization Fund. This enabled the transfer of approximately $1.2 billion to the Contingency Fund. Upon approval by Parliament, $1.2 billion was drawn from the Contingency Fund to support government efforts to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. In the 2020 Mid-Year Fiscal Policy Review, revisions were made to the 2020 budget to reflect policy changes as well as executive decisions made to mitigate the effect of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the 2021 budget included the necessary provisions to facilitate mitigation of the residual effects of COVID-19 and to facilitate the revitalization of the Ghanaian economy. To ensure transparency and accountability in the use of funds earmarked for COVID-19 mitigation, existing financial management rules and regulations were used to disburse funds whilst ensuring the necessary timelines required in dealing with the pandemic were met. Mr. Speaker, in line with our financial management rules and regulations, all covered entities keep records and subject themselves to internal audit on a continuous basis, as well as external annual audits by the Supreme Audit Institution of Ghana, the Audit Service. Mr. Speaker, in the 2020 mid-year review and supplementary estimates, I presented a comprehensive update on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures government have put in place to contain it. Furthermore, in the 2021 budget, government presented to this august House the budget statement and economic policy, including a detailed breakdown and justification for the COVID-19 expenditure, including a statement showing the sources of funds and expenditure on COVID-19, and this was duly approved by the House. Again, in November 2021, when I presented the 2022 budget, I provided further updates and schedules on COVID-19 expenditure. Mr. Speaker, I now proceed to provide additional details on the COVID-19 expenditure that I have listed. Support to households. Mr. Speaker, total amount programmed for the initiatives under the support to households in 2020 was 1.718 billion, out of which amount utilized was 1.55 billion. The details include a total amount of 12.1 million for the distribution of packed food in Accra, Makasua, and Greater Kumasi. This includes the cost of transportation of packed food in some suburbs of Greater Kumasi by NADMO. The expenditure for the provision of hot meals during the lockdown served about 2.7 million persons for the period of the lockdown at a unit cost of 4 cedis, 32 pesos. A total amount of 42.24 million was expended on distribution of dry food packages through faith-based organizations in Greater Accra and Kumasi. A total of about 470,000 persons received these food packages. As part of the support to households, Mr. Speaker, governments through the Ministry of Water and Sanitation and its agency, Ghana Water Company Limited, provided free water, which initially lasted for the period April to September 2020. Following an executive directive, this was extended to December 2020 for lifeline consumers. The distribution was also carried out by the Community Water and Sanitation Agency and other smallholder water supply organizations. An amount of 556 million was budgeted in 2020 for this program, out of which 456 million was utilized. In 2021, a total allocation of 200 million Ghana cedis was made for the provision of free water and electricity for lifeline consumers, out of which 143 million was utilized. Government also made provision in the budget for free electricity to lifeline consumers and absorbed 50% of all electricity bills for all residential and commercial customers. A total cost of 1.04 billion was utilized for the policy from April to September 2020. Health response supplies, equipment and relief for health workers. Mr. Speaker, the total amount programmed for the measures under the health response in 2020 was 1.522 billion, out of which an amount of 1.049 billion was utilized. The details are as follows. A total amount of 2 million cedis for busing health workers within Accra, Kumasi, and Kasua to and from work for the duration of the lockdown, and metro mass transport. The whole amount was utilized, with 0.7 million going to CAPTI and 1.3 million going to support the services of the Metro Mass Transport Company. A total of 80 million Ghana cedis was programmed to pay 50% of the basic salary as allowance for frontline workers. All requests have been reconciled and paid. Total 1.44 billion was programmed for the provision of PPEs, testing kits, and medical equipment, as well as to undertake community engagements. Other expenditure includes communication, quarantine, and treatment for COVID-19. An amount of 1.01 billion was utilized. Health infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in the wake of the pandemic, government took a bold decision to provide health infrastructure in the districts and regions that did not have a district or regional hospital. In all 111 district, regional, and mental hospitals, Agenda 111 were programmed for construction. A total of 600 million Ghana cedis was released to begin the construction across the country in 2020. In the 2021 budget, an amount of $779 million was programmed for the continuation of Agenda 111 projects. Out of this, an amount of $763.92 million has been released. Mr. Speaker, government programmed a total amount of $1.2 billion for security operations, evacuation of Ghanaians stranded abroad, and coordination of MMDA sanitation and disinfection exercises. As of 31st December 2020, amount of $875 million was utilized. This expenditure was utilized by the Ministries of Local Government and Rural Development, the Interior, Justice and Attorney General, Defense, National Security, and God. Mr. Speaker, in addition, measures to stabilize the economy after the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, government also implemented programs to revitalize the economy and protect jobs. These include the Coronavirus Alleviation Program Business Support Scheme, CAPBUZ, by the NBSSI, now the Ghana Enterprise Agency, which provided soft loans to 302,000 small and medium-scale businesses across the country to mitigate the economic impact of the pandemic and protect jobs. A total of $600 million was utilized. The Ghana Cares Ofori-Atta program was launched in November 2020 to make strategic investments in the real sector of the economy. Total amount released as at the end of 2021 was 539 million Ghana cedis out of the total program amount of 1.5 billion cedis. And the establishment of the Development Bank of Ghana to address gaps in the Ghanaian credit markets, especially the availability of medium and long-term finance for the private sector. A total amount of 853 million has been transferred to the bank as seed capital. Mr. Speaker, other measures include the transfer of 1.5 million to the statutory funds in line with approved budget to enable them to deliver on their mandate. This was occasioned by the non-performance of revenues largely due to the global lockdowns, and the payment of $1.267 billion to contractors to settle outstanding indebtedness to contractors that were programmed to be paid in 2020 with revenues collected, as well as ease the financial burden that arose due to the outbreak of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, due to the COVID-19 protocols, the Electoral Commission and National Identification Authority had to increase their registration sites and recruit more personnel to ensure compliance during the registration and voting. An amount of $401 million was transferred to the NIA and EC as additional support to ensure COVID-19 compliant registration and voting. National COVID-19 response to school reopening. Mr. Speaker, in September 2020, while other countries had closed all schools, government, with advice of experts, took the bold decision to partially reopen schools to enable final year students write their final exams under very strict COVID-19 protocols. This was largely successful with minimal infections among the students. An amount of $1.119.73 billion was allocated for mass school reopening in January 2021. This was to ensure that all students and teachers were provided with infection prevention and control items. Total amount utilized was $1.118 billion. Procurement of COVID-19 vaccines. Mr. Speaker, the acceleration of sustained socio-economic recovery through advances in vaccine development requires the mobilization of significant resources to enable the deployment of a mass vaccination program. The urgent need to vaccinate a target of 20 million people to achieve herd immunity and strengthen the health system in Ghana required the government of Ghana makes a significant allocation for the purchase of vaccines. A total amount of $929.3 million was therefore allocated in the 2021 budget for the procurement of vaccines. The National Deployment and Vaccination Plan estimated an amount of $51.6 million to undertake the vaccination deployment. A total amount of $776 million Ghana cedis was released for the purchase of Sputnik V, the Janssen CoV SARS-2 COVID vaccines, and the emergency deployment of vaccines in schools. As of 31st March 2022, a total of 5.4 million vaccines have been supplied and received into the country since the commencement of the COVID-19 campaign, March 2nd, 2021. 14.3 million doses of vaccines have been administered as of April 25th, 2022. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this presentation demonstrates government's commitment to accountability and transparency. All program mobilized and utilized funds have been duly reported on. As a government, we continue to operate an open door policy and welcome any opportunity to engage in the national interest. Let me reiterate that never before in the history of the Fourth Republic has the entire Ghanaian economy and society experienced such severe shock occasioned by a single external event. Indeed, from independence to date, the Ghanaian economy has never faced such a sudden nationwide dramatic reduction in household and corporate economic activity. But as the President said in one of his addresses to the nation during the coronavirus outbreak, our survival is in our hands and it continues to be in our hands. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity and God bless our homeland, Ghana.
Honorable members, you've heard the Minister for Finance. I just want to remind you of Order 70 again, and will permit comments to be made by members. I have the guide from leaders that the intention is for me to recognize 3 members from each side of the divide plus 1. One being a member from each side of the leadership of the House. The left side have submitted the 4 names. I'm waiting on the right side to submit their 4 names. And so whilst I wait on the right side, I will start by giving the left the first shot in terms of comments to the statement made by the Minister of Finance. The first person I've been guided to give the opportunity is the Honorable Ofori-Atta. Honorable Member, comments. You may go on, please.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to make some comment on the statement that was delivered by our Minister responsible for Finance. Mr. Speaker, I have 3 major concerns on the very statement that was delivered by our Minister. Mr. Speaker, the first one relates to the fact that I've seen the Minister accounting for the sources of financing or sources of fund for the amount they received to tackle COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, one particular one that is conspicuously missing in it is the COVID-19 Trust Fund that was established by the President of the Republic of Ghana. Mr. Speaker, that is critical because any amount that accrued to the fund is public fund and it should be accounted as such. Mr. Speaker, if I decide to donate money to fight a pandemic, that money is not private money. That money was received by state actor, and it should be accounted for as such. And so therefore, in showing us the sources of funding, that particular line is conspicuously missing. And I urge the minister to come again on that one, because we need to get some accountability on that one. So Speaker, that's the first point. So Speaker, it does not matter. It is public money. And when you receive public money, you account for it. That is what you should do. The Speaker, the second point has to do with the fact that our minister responsible for finance has said that he received money from 6 different areas. The first one is COVID-19 DOD contingency fund, 1.2 billion. He's gone on to say that World Bank Group Fund Health Intervention, 1.3 billion. He lined of which and showed all of the amount to prove that he's gotten 1.3 billion. IMF, 1 billion. AFDB, an amount of 405.6 million. And then EU and BOG COVID-19 bond, 10 billion. If you add all of them, he's saying 19.3 billion. So Speaker, granted that he's received 19.3 billion. But what I can see here is that he has said that so far, from January 2020 to December 2021, he has spent 12 billion of that money, 12 billion. What he has failed to do is to tell us that between the 19.3 billion and the 12 billion, the difference of 7.3 billion, where the money is and what they have used the money for. So Speaker, you have mobilized 19.3 billion from your own document. So Speaker, I make reference to the document. First, I'm making reference to page 4, table 1. Page 4, table 1. I receive it at the same time as you receive it. Page 4, table 1. Table 1 says that you have mobilized 19.3 billion sources of funding. Funding sources, 19.3 billion. That is what is there. So Speaker, if you go further to the same document, page 6, item A, expenditure on COVID-19. It gives us status of utilization of 2020 and 2021 COVID-19. So Speaker, the last item, it gives you the amount they budgeted, the amount they have released so far. And he said that so far, they have released 12 billion. So my argument is that if you've mobilized 19 billion and you've spent 12 billion, at least give us an indication. You received IMF 1 billion. You are telling us that you raised a bond of 10 billion. You're also telling us that you had some sources from World Bank. You've given us the numbers, but you have spent 12 billion. Give us an idea where the rest of the money is. The bond that you received, the IMF money that you received, where is the rest of that money? So Speaker, I think it's a legitimate question. It is a legitimate question, and that is my second point. So Speaker, Mr. Speaker, so the difference here that I'm seeing is 7.3 billion Ghana cedis unaccounted for, and I want to find out where is that money. It's legitimate. So Speaker, my third point relates to the fact that our minister responsible for finance has given us an indication that he spent 12 billion Ghana cedis so far, 2020 and 2021. The Speaker, my concern has to do with the fact that, yes, he has given us some headline items. He said to us, and it is also in the media review of the year 2021, Government of Ghana's media review. And if you refer to page 101, appendix 4.3 of the media, 4E of the media review, the same thing has been stated here. Mr. Speaker, the minister had said, and let me commend him for the consistency in reporting. Mr. Speaker, page 101 of the media review is also in the same statement, appendix 1 of the media of the document that he's given to us. He said, Mr. Speaker, that they have spent 598 million at the time, from January to June 2021, 598 million, equivalent to $1 billion for the purposes of, 100 million US, for the purposes of payment for nose masks, hand sanitizers, and Veronica buckets. Mr. Speaker, my concern is, yes, you spend 598 million for nose masks, hand sanitizers, and Veronica buckets for the reopening of schools. But at what cost? We need the fine details, expenditure returns of that. We will need expenditure returns. Mr. Speaker, you went on in your own document. You said that you paid 36 million for the design of Agenda 111. For who? 36 million. For what purpose? Design of Agenda 111. Mr. Speaker, in the same document, he went on to say, page 100 of the media review, again stated here, and that's what I'm saying, I commend you for the consistency. Mr. Speaker, he says here that Agenda 111, January to December 2020, provision of health infrastructure, Agenda 111, district and regional hospital, 600 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, my question is, you spent 600 million for Ghana cedis for Agenda 111. Noble idea. But have they used the money? And at what time? I know the president cut the sword for Agenda 111 in 2021. But this money was spent in 2020. So, Speaker, I think it is fair for me to ask this question. So, Speaker, on that basis, Mr. Speaker, I call on you, Mr. Speaker, to invoke Article 103 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, that says the Parliament shall appoint standing committees or any other committee as may be necessary for the effective discharge of its function. So, Speaker, we cannot sit here and say that the Minister of Finance should be the only one accounting for the COVID amount. So, Speaker, the Minister responsible for Finance is only a conduit of releasing the money. But the monies were spent at the various MDAs. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I call on you, Mr. Speaker, to set up an ad hoc committee so that we can bring the various heads of the MDAs, in particular, that spent the money, to account for this in detail.
I don't want to call your name. Yes. Honorable Atoforson, you may sum up. If I hear you shout across the aisle, I'll be compelled to name you.
I'm not.
Please. Yes. May you conclude?
Mr. Speaker, I'm concluding. Mr. Speaker, I'm calling on you, Mr. Speaker, to use the powers under the Constitution, Article 101, to set up 103 of the Constitution, to set up an ad hoc committee to particularly get the various COVID entities that spent the money to account for it in detail. So, Speaker, yes, I've seen a bold attempt by giving us some headline items. I acknowledge that. But there are gaps. The gaps, I cannot ask the minister responsible for finance to give me the details of the fact that they spent $100 million on nose masks and hand sanitizers. I have to ask the minister who purchased that. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking you that this committee must be established by this House, chaired by a member of the minority committee, so that we can go into the details, to get the details out, and all of us will be able to get the facts as we need to. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, I gave the ranking member for finance ample time because he's a ranking member on the committee for finance. I will apply same to the, I think it's the chairman, vice chairman, who will be speaking for on behalf of the chairman, the same time to also make comments. So, Chairman, Vice Chairman for the Committee on Finance, please, you can do so now. Make your comments now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed in my colleague, Honorable Atufo. I expected much from him. I expected in-depth analysis of what he's been spewing on the airwaves and putting in the minds of the good people of this country that there's been something untoward with regards to the COVID-19 expenditure. He didn't even read the report, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me refer you to paragraph...
Honorable Vice Chairman, you are to make comments on the statement made by the Minister. You are not to debate. You are to make comments, and in fact, the Deputy Majority Leader emphasized this. So go on with your comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for your guidance. Mr. Speaker, let me refer you to paragraph 15 of the statement made by the Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted that the status of utilization of the funds to finance the COVID-19 measures excludes funds of the National COVID-19 Trust Fund and the Ghana Private Sector COVID-19 Fund. Mr. Speaker, it must be put on record that my colleague never read the statement and did not avert his mind today. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our colleagues have been on the rampage. Our colleagues have been on the rampage trying to foul the atmosphere in this country with regards to the expenditures that the Minister has ably presented to the House. Mr. Speaker, a summary of the expenditures are captured on pages 14 and 15 of the statement. Mr. Speaker, in March 2020, when the COVID-19 outbreak occurred, we all were very scared and did not have any clue about this pandemic. It took a responsible government to devise a very deliberate plan to protect us. Mr. Speaker, all the 275 members in this chamber are alive. We all benefited one way or the other from the relief that have been presented to this House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the extent that our spouses were even privileged to come to the hospital or the clinic to get their jabs. Where were we going to get the monies from, Mr. Speaker? How many of us didn't benefit from the free water supply as captured in this report? How many of us didn't benefit from the free electricity? The lifeline consumers, the Minister of Energy is here. Our constituents, how many of you didn't benefit? Mr. Speaker, we are here for accountability. That is why the Minister on pages 14 and 15 has given us an elaborate expenditure plan, which cannot be criticized by your good self. You haven't been able to punch any meaningful hole in the expenditure as provided for by the Minister. We expected much from the minority. You've disappointed the people of this country. You've told them a lot that the government has concealed a lot of expenditures under this COVID-19 relief. To hear your ranking member or our ranking member on finance speak, rather commending a Minister of Finance, I doff my hat for the Minister of Finance for being honest and consistent, as stated by Honorable Atufo. Mr. Speaker, Agenda 111. The Minister said, and rightly so, that he set aside 600 million for this elaborate program. COVID-19 exposed Ghana's health system to the extent that most districts in this country did not have health facilities. What did a thinking government do? A thinking government decided that, look, let me take advantage of this pandemic and spread health infrastructure across the country. How do I start it? I have to make provision for in the budget. Fortunately for us, our colleagues and ourselves approved the budget and included that money. 700 million cedis was also added, making it 1.3 billion. Projects are ongoing across the districts. We as a country must look for additional funds to ensure that our brothers in Bumkurugu, Okakwe Central, and across the country have access to quality health care. Not my sister from Adan having a beautiful hospital in Adan. We all need Adan Hospital in Ipoho. Mr. Speaker, it is heartwarming that this matter is being settled today, once and for all, and that a call for an ad hoc committee is an afterthought. To the extent that the minister has spent time to give us a detailed expenditure, it is really uncalled for to waste the time of the Ghanaian. At the end of the day, the Auditor General will come back to this country with his report. And that committee is chaired by the Deputy Minority Leader, who is very knowledgeable in that space. Use your intellect to criticize the Auditor General's report and the report from the MMDAs, and you come and answer. I thank you very much.
I think the Vice Chair has done well by making the comments within a very few minutes. I will now move on to my left side, and from the list submitted is the turn of Honorable Kwabena Akando.
I'm most grateful, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to comment on the statement delivered by the Minister responsible for Finance. Mr. Speaker, this statement is the very reason why a bipartisan committee must be constituted to probe the entire expenditure on COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, I will point to few inaccuracies in the statement presented by the Minister responsible for Finance. Mr. Speaker, that must not be entertained on this floor. Mr. Speaker, may I refer you to page 7, paragraph 19. Mr. Speaker, with your permission. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I wish to dispel the notion that there have been inconsistencies in government data on COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President intimated during the State of the Nation address on 30th March 2022 that we had mobilized, Mr. Speaker, the emphasis is mine, about 17.7 billion since 2020. Mr. Speaker, that is not what the President said. Mr. Speaker, may I refer you to the State of the Nation address, and that is on page 5. Page 5. Mr. Speaker, the very first line. In all data from the Ministry of Finance tells us that an amount of 17.7 billion, which is 4.6% of the GDP, has been spent, not mobilized. Mr. Speaker, there's a clear difference between what has been mobilized and what has been spent. Why do you do this to Parliament? Mr. Speaker, between him and the President, who is telling us the truth. Mr. Speaker, again, Mr. Speaker, if you check the statement that has been given to us, especially Sobul, Mr. Speaker, especially Appendix 1, status of utilization of 2022 COVID-19 budget. Mr. Speaker, this statement tells us, Mr. Speaker, that an amount of 600 million Ghana cedis was released with respect to Agenda 111. After 2020, Mr. Speaker, as a matter of fact, Agenda 111 was actually commissioned, the sword was cut on the 17th of August 2021. Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, that money was released as far back as 2020, which is clearly captured here. What was that money used for? Mr. Speaker, these are all issues that we demand answers. And Mr. Speaker, knowing very well the rules of contributing or commenting on statements, we cannot use statements to resolve these issues. Mr. Speaker, again, let me refer you to paragraph 28 of the statement. Paragraph 28 says that they spent hotmail and they spent 4.3 Ghana cedis on each person, and they spent on about 2,744 people. Mr. Speaker, if you do the computation, you are arriving at around 11.9 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, there's a huge difference of about 240, almost 243,000 Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, the minister is telling us that, Mr. Speaker, that money was used for transportation within the metropolis. Mr. Speaker, I think that we need to know the details of this expenditure. This is actually not enough, and that will give us the opportunity, even if possible, to subpoena other documents to probe further. So, Mr. Speaker, coming by a statement will not help us, and therefore I support the call that this House constitute a bipartisan committee to look into this matter. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity.
Honorable members, it's now the turn of the Honorable Deputy Minister of Finance, Honorable Abina Osei Asare.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to comment on the statement on the floor. Mr. Speaker, both speakers from the other side are missing one thing, and that is they had read Mr. Speaker, if they had read paragraph 6 of the minister's statement, they would have realized that the minister said, yes, the total inflow for 2020 was 19.3 billion. And out of that, they used some to directly fund COVID-19 expenditures, and others were indirectly. One, on the expenditure side, we allocated 1.16 billion, and directly. And Mr. Speaker, the difference of 8.1 billion was what we used to shore up the budget. You remember we came to this House and revised the expenditure, revised the revenue numbers by close to 11.1 billion as a result of the effects of COVID. So the difference between the 11.1 and the 19.3 is what we use to shore up the budget. If you revise your revenue numbers down by 11.1 billion and you shore it up with a difference of 8.1 billion, clearly you've accounted for the 19.3 billion. And then I want to also go to page 5. I also want to go to page 7, paragraph 19. And it was quoted that the president said they had spent 8.1 billion on COVID-19 funds. When you come to page 6, clearly it is correct. You see it here that what we utilize, what we spent, what we utilize is actually 8.1 billion. So clearly, today the minister has put to rest the inconsistencies being said or yes by our minority brothers and sisters. And today it is very clear that we have been consistent. Yes, it was 19.3 billion that came in. We have been able to account for the 19.3 billion. 8.1 billion was used directly for COVID-19 expenditure, and the difference was used to shore up the revenue numbers that dropped. Again, when you go to 2021, we put in the budget an expenditure of 4.6 billion for direct COVID-19 expenditures. And clearly, we've been able to account for the 3.9 billion that we utilized. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't see the need why our colleagues on the other side are asking for a special audit in this. Clearly, the Auditor General at the end of the day will also look into this. This is what we have, and this is what I believe the Auditor General is also going to look at. One thing that I also want to point out that was out there was the specific inflows from the World Bank. Our colleagues on the other side also mentioned in various forums that this was not fully accounted for. Clearly, the $435 million that came from the World Bank has been accounted for on paragraph 11. When you look at it, it says that paragraph 11I, there was a fast track amount of $35 million US. And then when you go to paragraph 11II, it says there was another 65 million which we have accounted for. And paragraph 11III, there's another 130 million US that also came from the World Bank. And in paragraph 12, it says 200 million also came from the World Bank. This we have all accounted for. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy that today we are putting the matter to rest. All the monies that came in 2020, that 19.3 billion, we have accounted for it through the table that has been provided here, where we have 8.1 billion being utilized, and then the difference is what we use to shore up the revenue numbers. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 was a rare thing. We had never seen this before, but yet still, this government thought it wise and saw that the most important thing to do was to save lives and also to protect lives and save the economy. So two things this government did. First was to, in the midst of the pandemic, was to save lives and protect livelihoods. And that is what we did in 2021, and we accounted for it. And then the second was to see how we can revitalize the economy after the negative effects of COVID-19 pandemic. And that is why we also put in 4.6 billion. And then we have accounted for the 3.9 billion that we use. Mr. Speaker, with this, I believe that we have brought the matter to rest. Let's admit that you thought we couldn't account for it, and we have now accounted for it. Let's put it to rest and then move on. The Auditor General at the end of the day will also come and account for. We'll also go through the books and account for every money that we have spent on COVID-19, both directly and indirectly. So, Mr. Speaker, we thank you for this opportunity to tell the whole of Ghana that clearly these monies came in, and this is how we have utilized it. So I believe that from today, let us admit that we erred in telling Ghanaians that we have squandered the money. Clearly, it is all clear here that we have the money, we have used it, we have utilized it for the benefit of Ghanaians, and that is why, by God's grace, we did not see what we saw in other countries. If we had sat down and done nothing, maybe the effect would have been bad. But thanks be to God that He gave us our president in the person of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and that is how come we are seeing the results we are seeing here. Let's admit it when it's right. When it's right, let us learn to admit it, that it is right. If it is wrong, we understand. But clearly, the way Ghana handled COVID, including its expenditures, is something that everybody can attest to it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Honorable Adongo Isaac.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make comments about the statement that the minister just read to us on COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, the issue about COVID-19 expenditure, come to listen to you, and its accountability is a major issue that hinges on the credibility of our country. We've spent a lot of money that don't belong to us, but the magnanimity of a taxpayer sitting somewhere else, in billions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, as I look through the documents that have been served in this House by the same government and the same minister in the past, I'm struggling to understand whether this document is picking the data from somewhere else or the government's own data, which is copiously reported in its own budget statement for 2021. Mr.
Mr. Speaker, the issue my colleague raised about the statement of the President to the effect that we spent 17.7 billion, it cannot be the case that today you are reporting that you spent 12 billion. How many months after the President spoke? As a matter of fact, we expect a better record to be showing that it is more than 17.7 billion. So right away, we become very confused that the numbers are now reversing backwards. From 17.7 to 12.2 or 12.0. Mr. Speaker, if we make a mistake and we call him tomorrow, it will be 9 billion. That is the problem. That is the problem. Mr. Speaker, one of my biggest difficulties is that this is a house of records. The minister appeared before this house and presented the 2021 budget statement and economic policy. In that document, the minister reported to us where he has received monies for COVID-19 and how much he has spent. Mr. Speaker, this is not my document. This is the Minister for Finance's own document, which is a record in this house. Mr. Speaker, if you go to page 274 of that statement of the budget, particularly under Appendix 12B, performance summary of funding sources, Mr. Speaker, all the sources that the minister raised the money, he reported the total at 19.3, which he has rightly reported in this report, except that he provided utilization that he had already done in each of the areas that he has listed. He actually even indicated how much of those utilizations are as a matter of loans to finance the deficit, and how much of it is our own money that doesn't go into the deficit. Mr. Speaker, the minister concluded that all the monies we borrowed that was utilized and not in any bank account ended up at about 16.4 billion. He reported in that same document that when he now adds our own money, which in this case is the money he drew down on our contingency vote or contingency fund, the total amount is 18.1 billion. Mr. Speaker, this doesn't look like 12 billion. In fact, that is 50% underreported. From the minister's own document before this house, he is unable to speak to the same numbers a year after. That is very serious. Mr. Speaker, if I take the numbers the minister is reporting for 2021, that he spent 3.9, and I add it to the figure he gave me for 2020, Mr. Speaker, I get total expenditure on COVID of 22.1 billion, the minister's own report. Mr. Speaker, the minister is not reporting to us 10 billion Ghana cedis of our own money.
Why?
In his own report. This is not my report. This is the budget statement of the Minister for Finance,
And then quoting scripture,
which is a public record in this house. And that after almost a year, 6 billion has disappeared, 10 billion has disappeared, and it is now a Koshoko 12 billion. Mr. Speaker, we must be very serious with this house. And we must be serious with the international community that gave us our money.
yes.
Mr. Speaker, this is an affront to democracy. And I sit here and I can't even trust documents with these people. I don't know the lifespan of that document. In fact, 2 days later, that document will not be the same.
And how much more the Bible will?
How can I be relying on this type of data from the same source? Mr. Speaker, it is very, very serious. And Mr. Speaker, I've heard my colleagues try to say that because the Auditor General will bring us a report, we should not probe this. Mr. Speaker, our audit practice and reporting does not provide a room for special audit to be presented on COVID alone. The audit report will be reporting the totality of government finances and public finances. But then we have approved a special expenditure. We have gotten special funding. we are struggling to get to the bottom of that matter. That requires a special activity.
Absolutely.
And that our current arrangement of audit do not give us the opportunity to get what we want. And what we want is that we want to be sure whether it is 17.7 as reported by the President, whether it is 12 billion as reported by the Finance Minister today, or it is the 22 billion he reported to us last year. Mr. Speaker, this cannot be something that will require the Auditor General to give us an omnibus account. Mr. Speaker, to do justice to the people of Ghana, to reclaim the credibility of the political class in the utilization of our resources, there is an urgent need for Parliament to reclaim its integrity by making sure that we take steps to go to the bottom of these three conflicting numbers that are exposing the reporting of our country. Mr. Speaker, we have heard voice notes, we have heard audios that are going around of certain political candidates claiming that our COVID money was shared to them for elections. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious indictment on us.
Honourable Member, comments on the statement made by the Minister. Comments on the statement made by the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, then I withdraw. But it suffices it to say that I am struggling to reconcile the numbers from the Minister for Finance in two different documents published by him himself and that of the President of the Republic. And I'm at pains to see how the Auditor General's report will resolve this matter. On this basis, Mr. Speaker, I would like to support the call that Parliament must take its destiny into its own hands and get to the bottom of this matter. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, we now have to listen to the comments from the Deputy Majority Leader, Honourable Afinyo Markin.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this treasure space to make comments on the submissions made by the Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, today, history will record that the minority created its own cul-de-sac. Upon creating so much impression about the COVID expenditure, and when the opportunity came, it entered into its own ditch. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to the comment by my respected colleagues in the minority. Mr. Speaker, so many inconsistencies in the comments coming from one side, whereas the Honourable Ofori-Atta submits that the Honourable Minister of Finance must be commended for his consistency in reporting. His other colleague, Honourable Adongo, is on his own route, saying other things. Mr. Speaker, in my view, the minority as a group should have come with a consistent common ground to advocate a position so that Ghanaians would understand that. Mr. Speaker, I align with the finance minister and we are on the same position. Your side is inconsistent, whereas Honourable Ofori-Atta, who has been in government before, appreciates the fact that there has been consistency and is commending the finance minister. Others are taking the finance minister to the cleaners. These are comments, Mr. Speaker, that posterity is going to judge them on. These are comments that, Mr. Speaker, hands up forever will remember that, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Atto-Forson, in his comments, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Atto-Forson, Mr. Speaker, truth results in bravery. And the ranking member on finance has today, after all, Mr. Speaker, after all the attacks,
Honorable Deputy Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I definitely defer to you because of your position. But so far, what you read yourself as the standing orders talks about comments on the statement made by the minister. Not statements made or comments made by other members. But I agree with you that in making your comments, you have to refer to earlier comments. But you have not made any comment of your own so far.
Mr. Speaker, you are well placed in the east. You are well placed in the east of this chamber to guide. And I take a cue. Mr. Speaker, suffice to state that before my own comment, I must commend him. And Mr. Speaker, if you don't compliment each other in this chamber will collapse. Mr. Speaker, our duty as Democrats in upholding this democracy is to compliment each other. And my respected colleague Atto-Forson, Mr. Speaker, the ranking member.
He has elected to be truthful. He has elected to be truthful today. He has elected to be
former Deputy Finance Minister.
He has elected to be truthful today.
PhD, etc., etc. Today,
He has elected to be truthful.
has subjected himself to facts. Mr. Speaker, having said that, my own comment. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Finance Minister, although he walks through the valley of the shadow of death, his faith has led him to fear no evil. And where the name of the Lord is invoked, trust that no danger shall ensue. And today, Mr. Speaker, I shall refer my colleagues as part of my comment to Order 151 and 152 of the rules of this House. We should not, in our desperate attempt to bring down a government policy, or in our desperate attempt to get power, to render the rules odious. These rules are there to guide all of us. We have committees in Parliament. If, Mr. Speaker, in the comments of Honorable Atto-Forson, he contends that, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Atto-Forson contends that he does acknowledge that indeed the Ministry of Finance did not do the specific expenditures. He does contend, and it's factual, and I commend him for that. If that is so, and we agree and believe same to be true, then let us rely on the committees of Parliament. We don't need a special committee. We don't need another committee. Mr. Speaker, are my friends going to be tolerant? I listen to them quietly. Are my friends going to be tolerant? Mr. Speaker, this is a beautiful chamber where we make comments and enjoy each other. May they be quiet and listen to me. It's my turn now. Mr. Speaker, the point is, we should not render the rules of this House odious, except when there is an exceptional situation. And so far in their submissions, there hasn't been any comment arguing exceptional circumstance. I believe that if we are dealing with expenditures at the Ministry of Health, the Health Committee has the capacity. In any event, I see this call for a special committee as a rehash, as another approach to reintroduce a motion that was defeated on this House on procedural grounds. Mr. Speaker, there is going to be a constitutional approach in even further dealing with the very concerns they are asking. We have an Auditor General who has a mandate, a constitutional mandate, to deal with expenditures from various ministries, agencies, and departments. So, Mr. Speaker, nothing can be hidden from the people of Ghana. But, Mr. Speaker, because the majority leader is going to round up, I will not go further, except to state for the records that when you are dealing with trust funds, and this one I would want to direct my submission at Honorable Atta-Forson, he strongly in his comments, I don't want to say you criticize the finance minister or you thought he failed to account for it, but Mr. Speaker, the law must be clear. I know generally that was your expectation, but it is a fund being managed by its trustees, and he indicated that this is the fact. You are saying public funds, Mr. Speaker. Our laws are clear on what constitutes public funds, and I do not want to at all. You know, we share the same esprit de corps, and I wouldn't want to, when you err, I would want to be magnanimous. When I err, I expect the same thing from you. But, Mr. Speaker, the contention that the Minister of Finance has failed to render an account on that trust fund because it's public funds, Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect. Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect. Sometimes we all err. Mr. Speaker, we all err sometimes. But on this occasion, I dare contend that in his comment on that aspect of the submission, as contained in paragraph 14, Honorable Atta-Forson got it entirely wrong. I hold that view respectfully, that he got it all wrong. The minister stated the fact. The minister did not veer away from the fact. The minister has been consistent, has been transparent, and today, nobody can say that during the lockdown, we didn't serve hot meals. Nobody can say that during the lockdown, Ghanaians did not receive nose masks. Nobody can say that Parliament of Ghana was denied what it needed to protect the 275 of us. Mr. Speaker, by the grace of God, through the intervention of this government, through the proactiveness of the finance minister, none of us lost his life. All 275 of us are intact. All of us are here. We took our job. We were protected. And Mr. Speaker, what more? Mr. Speaker, we are here to receive the facts. And when the facts are given us, we should at least be fair in acknowledging. But so far, I conclude by saying that the minority, putting all their comments together, say that their leader is here to speak. And I trust that he's going on the path of Atta-Forson. I know, because what Atta-Forson has said, nothing can take it away from the records. The standard he has set cannot perish this afternoon. Nobody can attempt to perish what Atta-Forson has said, that the minister was consistent, was transparent, and must be commended. On that note, Mr. Speaker, I thank you without further submission.
We will now listen to the comments of the Minority Leader, Honorable Haruna Idrisu.
Mr. Speaker, let me first of all thank you for the leadership you have provided in supporting this House, the Parliament of Ghana, to demand an exact accountability from the Honorable Minister for Finance in pursuit of our primary role of exercising oversight. Mr. Speaker, how refreshing that when you go to the preamble of our Constitution, it emphasizes freedom, justice, probity, and accountability. Mr. Speaker, we are all holding the statement from the Honorable Minister for Finance. May I, with respect, Mr. Speaker, refer you to page 11, in particular paragraph 34 of the Honorable Minister of Finance statement. He states, and I quote, transfer of 1.5 billion to the statutory funds in line with the approved budget to enable them deliver on their mandate. Mr. Speaker, statutory funds, especially the common fund, is established by Article 252 of the Constitution as revenue-driven. How then can you use a loan for purpose of statutory funds? Since when have borrowing funds become revenue borrowing? That you would allocate 1.501 billion to statutory funds from borrowed amounts, when the Constitution requires that a percentage of total revenue, not a percentage of total borrowing, is dedicated to the statutory funds. Mr. Speaker, then in the same page, Mr. Speaker, same page 10, paragraph 33C, this is what the Minister for Finance has to say. The establishment of the Development Bank Ghana to address gaps in the Ghanaian credit market, especially the availability of medium and long-term finance for the private sector. Then, Mr. Speaker, my emphasis, a total of 853 million. Few days ago, the President was reported in the Ghanaian media on this particular matter. Mr. Speaker, same Minister of Finance statement, the amount of money he received from the European Union, which was meant for the purpose of establishing the Development Bank, Mr. Speaker, in the Minister's statement, page 4, I quote, is 504 million. So you have spent 800 million on the establishment of Development Bank, when you are also accounting for the EU only giving you 504 million. Yet the people of Ghana are aware that the Development Bank was established with seed money from the EU money of 853 million. We need the fine detail. Here you are providing for 504 million in your table, table 1, paragraph 9, whilst you are reporting 800 million, a discrepancy of almost 300 million Ghana cedis. And we want to know, even the Development Bank is now established that it's wholly established with statutory funds, even though we take note that this Parliament of Ghana was not given the opportunity to legislate on it, even with our sad experience of over 21 billion being spent on cleansing banks. You only needed Parliament to help you, to guide you in the establishment of new banks. We want reconciliation to it. Mr. Speaker, I'm also holding with me here message on the state of the nation by His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, presented to this August House Wednesday, 30th May 2022 at Parliament House. And Mr. Speaker, I refer you to page 4, and I quote His Excellency the President. Mr. Speaker, in all, data from the Ministry of Finance tells us that an amount of 17.7 billion or 4.6% of GDP has been spent in containing the pandemic since 2020. President of Ghana, 17.7 billion. Minister of Finance, 12 billion. Who should we believe? Who should we believe? The President or the Minister? 17 billion and 12 billion. Then, Mr. Speaker, who should we believe? Further, Mr. Speaker, the President also had this to say in the same page 4 of the State of the Nation address. It took an unbudgeted 1.9 billion to assure that our children and teaching staff went back to school. Mr. Speaker, President of Ghana, 1.9 billion. May I refer you to the Honorable Minister of Finance statement here, page 11, paragraph 36. The President says 1.9 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, the Minister is reporting 1.119 billion. Another discrepancy in page 36, and I read, an amount of 1,119,73 million was allocated for mass school reopening in January 2021. Yet the President says in his State of the Nation 1.9 billion, and you are giving us 1.1 billion. Another unexplained discrepancy. So, Mr. Speaker, for us, a probe and an open public inquiry into COVID expenditure beyond the headline numbers of the Minister of Finance is inevitable and an imperative. We are not looking for headline figures. I spent 12 billion. 12 billion on what? On what? We need the expenditure returns and expenditure details of every amount. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Atufonsin also raises the fundamental issue of accountability of the COVID Trust Fund, which is established by an act of Parliament. And Mr. Speaker, the reason we are asking for accountability, we know that beyond public-spirited individuals who were determined to support the President to save lives, we are not questioning that he needed to save lives, but save lives in the arena of probity and accountability. In that COVID Trust Fund, Mr. Speaker, we are told that the National Health Insurance Authority contributed 250,000, Ghana Stock Exchange 100,000, GMPC 1 million, Ghana Gas 1 million, Senate 500,000. These are all public funds that must be accounted for to the Parliament of Ghana. That is what we are demanding. So, Mr. Speaker, this is what makes the case for a public investigation, a public inquiry, whether it's ad hoc committee, it's a finance committee, it's a committee. We want an open public hearing on how COVID expenditure was done in the name of this republic. So, Mr. Speaker, I only can be commending you. Then I conclude, Mr. Speaker. And in concluding, for the record, Mr. Speaker, let's refer to program resources, Minister's Work, page 4. He provides in table 1. And Mr. Speaker, in table 1, he gives us where he got the resources from. Again, conspicuously missing in these resources, Mr. Speaker, in page 4. And I have the Hansard for 14th October 2020. And this was IFAD loan, Government of the Republic of Ghana, represented by the Minister of Finance and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, for an amount of 20 million United States dollars to finance the implementation of the emergency support to rural livelihood and food systems exposed to COVID-19. First of all, we want to find out whether farmers actually benefited from this facility. Then whether or not this account, this $20 million, has been accounted for in the COVID resources. This is Parliamentary Hansard, 16th October 2020, Friday, unaccounted. So, Mr. Speaker, for us, I'll speak, let me do the tables, Mr. Speaker, then I can conclude. Mr. Speaker, page 4. The minister accounts for 19.3 billion 600 as program support received. Then, Mr. Speaker, when you come to expenditure on COVID-19, status update on COVID-19 expenditure, page 6, he accounts for 12 billion. Then the president accounts for 17.7 billion. So the House people will say, couldn't to which, where is the missing money? 17.7 billion against 12 billion, against 19 billion, against 12 billion. Where is the money? So this makes our case compelling for a probe and an investigation. Mr. Speaker, so once again, I should thank you for enabling this House to exercise true oversight. This is what the Ghanaian people expect you and this Parliament to do, to hold ministers accountable, to protect the public purse by demanding accountability of COVID-related expenditure. The President says 17.7 billion. The Minister says 12 billion. Yet he received 19 billion. The rest of the money we are demanding. So, Mr. Speaker, we demand that you refer the statement to a committee of Parliament, whether it's an existing committee or a standing committee, to probe COVID expenditure beyond the headline numbers, and for this committee to demand expenditure returns, Mr. Speaker, so that we will be seen protecting the public purse. I rest my case. I thank you, Mr.
Honourable members, the last comment will be made by the majority leader and then leader of government business, Honourable Osei Mensah Bonsu.
Speaker, thank you very much for this opportunity to make some brief comments about the presentation of the Minister responsible for finance in respect of the COVID-19 expenditures. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has been summoned to this House to make a statement on COVID-19 expenditures for 2020 and 2021. Mr. Speaker, the minority leader has reminded us that what we are doing is part of our oversight responsibilities. And I agree entirely with you that we need to position Parliament to be able to inquire into expenditures, a way of providing oversight to enable this country to know whether or not we have value for money in the expenditures that we incur. Mr. Speaker, the minority leader has quoted the preamble of the Constitution to us, which emphasizes probity and accountability. And probity and accountability we must ensure within the strictures of the law. Mr. Speaker, it cannot just be populism. It must be done within the strictures of the law. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance allocates resources for various expenditures by the various bodies, ministries, departments, agencies, the other arms of government, including even Parliament, the judiciary, constitutional creatures. He makes allocations for expenditures to these bodies. Mr. Speaker, it is not for the Ministry of Finance to follow them on the path of their expenditures. That indeed is reserved to us in Parliament, the various committees, to do that. So when you summon the Minister of Parliament to come and make a statement on expenditures given to the various bodies, as I said, including Parliament, in my considered opinion, it's a bit misplaced. I say so because Parliament was given resources to deal with COVID. So Parliament itself did that. Have we submitted any expenditures to the minister for him to respond to Parliament? So you see what you are doing. It's completely misplaced. Mr. Speaker, we have committees in this House. And the committees, as provided for under Article 106, 103, Mr. Speaker, I should say. And I'm happy the first person who spoke to the minister's statement related to that. Mr. Speaker, it provides, and Article 103.3 says, committees of Parliament, the committee that we have established, the committees of Parliament shall be charged with such functions, including the investigation and inquiry into the activities and administration of ministries and departments as Parliament may determine. Mr. Speaker, we have the various sector committees, and I keep talking to this matter every time in this House. I don't want to say that our committees have been negligent.
Honorable Majority Leader, I'm compelled to suspend sitting for 10 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, we'll be back
within 10 minutes if you continue.
And projects, including the PFJ. During this period, Mr. Speaker, there has been a cumulative release of some 2.47 billion to the Ministry of Food and Agriculture to pay for commitments under this program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Yes, Honorable Seidu, any further question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have a follow-up question. Mr. Speaker, this follow-up question is against the background of the fact that there are shortages of fertilizer in the market now and farmers cannot afford to pay what is on the market. Mr. Minister, when exactly and how much did you release for payment? When will the payment, not just release, when will the payment be effected?
Honorable Member. Anyway, Honorable Member, you minded to answer that question? If you don't have the specific figures or time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, I think about 3 weeks ago is when the Ministry of Finance released the commencement to Controller and Accountant General. So you can verify with the Controller, which we did. Thank you.
Yes, Honorable Seidu, your last supplementary question.
Mr. Speaker, the Controller and Accountant General is under the Ministry of Finance. They will pay when there is money. You have released, they have not paid yet. Mr. Speaker, my supplementary question is, critical as fertilizer is to production of food in this country, will the finance minister, and owing to the fact that we have owed these suppliers for over 2 years, they have taken bank facilities and credit, will the Minister of Finance consider negotiating with banks and financial institutions to give these suppliers some long credit lines to be able to repay debts that are owed, because you have not been able to pay them in time? Thank you.
Yes, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honorable Jasol. I think it is quite clear to all of us that we are running a budget deficit which then leads to some of these outstandings that you've talked about. But specifically in the area of agriculture, Mr. Speaker, we established GERSEL, which in effect is supposed to help guarantee facilities that banks may give specifically in agriculture. And therefore, we expect banks to take advantage of that and extend longer-term loans. Mr. Speaker, more importantly, with the emergence of the Development Bank of Ghana, one of the specific areas in which they are going to support is agriculture, and already an MOU understanding is being developed between them and ADB Bank to look at this whole perennial long-term problem of financing of agriculture, not only access with regards to funds, but also long-term end rates that are sustainable. And that is the part of the justification for bringing into emergence the Development Bank of Ghana. So we look forward to better days ahead. Thank you so much, sir.
Very well. We move to question B. Question B. And the question stands in the member for Abrikuma North, Honorable Sheila Battles. Honorable, you may ask your question now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask the Minister for Finance the current status of funding for the construction of Phase 2 of the Tema motorway, which has been highlighted as a major issue for commuters. Thank you.
Yes, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Honorable Bartels. Mr. Speaker, the government of Ghana completed Phase 1 of the Tema motorway interchange, Tiers 1 and 2, with the grant support of Japanese yen 6.25 billion, approximately $55 million from the Japanese government. And this was commissioned by His Excellency the President on 15 June 2020. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to announce to this House that the government of Ghana has completed negotiations with the Japanese government for additional...
Well, thanks for watching TV3. You're still watching the Ofori-Atta, the finance minister, answering some questions on the floor of Parliament. But rest assured that we'll give you a wrap of those conversations at our major bulletin tonight at News 360 at 7 p.m. right here on TV3. Keep watching TV3. Don't go away.